Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. Gary Skogen's tour in Vietnam, 1971 to 1972, was the best year of his life. Living with fellow CID investigators in an isolated hooch overlooking the South China Sea at the U.S. base at Chu Lai, Skogen enforced military drug laws during his working hours and yet managed to pursue a life of perfect hedonism, far from the farm life in southwestern North Dakota where he grew up. With unlimited access to cheap beer, a wide variety of compliant Vietnamese women, and a jeep he had somehow commandeered, Skogen perfected his criminal investigative skills at a time when U.S. troop morale had reached its nadir. This unconventional, unheroic, and unapologetic book is not a typical Vietnam memoir. Together with 80% of the 2 million men and women who served in Vietnam, Skogen spent his time behind the scenes at a large support base. He did not slog on midnight patrols through Viet Cong tunnels or rice paddies studded with booby traps. He spent his year investigating the men who endangered the lives of their fellow soldiers by giving themselves over to unrestrained drug use. Skogen's gritty narrative proves that some whose names are incised on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall died in less than heroic circumstances. Backed by impeccable research in the files of the National Archives and Records Administration, this unromanticized account reveals the sordidness of the war in its late phases and questions the validity of seeing all Vietnam veterans as victims. The book that we're featuring this evening is Not All Heroes, an unapologetic memoir of the Vietnam War, 1971 to 1972, with my special guest, Vietnam veteran, police officer, and author Gary Skogen. Welcome to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Gary Skogen.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention for those people that might be a bit confused, we did this interview last week, but the audio was horrible. So as fairness to the audience and yourself and myself, we just agreed to, we had the ability to reschedule this interview for the benefit of the show itself. So thank you very much for being able to do that. Now, Gary, as we spoke last week, let's take our audience from how we go from, we mentioned in the introduction about your life in North Dakota. Talk about your life in North Dakota when you grew up, and tell us a little bit about that life before you ever thought of enlisting in the military.
Okay. Well, I was born in Hedonism, North Dakota, which is in the southwestern part of the state. 1945. I grew up on a farm. I attended school for 12 years on the same piece of property in Hedonism, North Dakota. Hedonism is a very small town. At the time that I was growing up, I think it was probably about 1,500 people. After I graduated from high school, I worked around Hedonism for a little bit, and then I moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I was 18 at the time. I got myself a job working in a hardware store there. And as I got closer to, I guess I would say, adulthood, I was thinking along the lines of wanting to be a police officer, and I was kind of pursuing joining the Spokane, Washington Police Department, which is only about 40 miles away from Coeur d'Alene. But, of course, I had to be 21 before I could do that. Well, in 1965, just before before my 20th birthday, two things happened that kind of changed my life and changed my plans and dreams. One of them was watching television, news broadcasts as they evacuated the dependence of military personnel out of Vietnam. The second thing that happened also occurred in 1965, and it was in December of 65. I received a draft notice. Back then, there was mandatory draft registration for anyone that was male that was 18 years of age. I had done my duty. I had registered for the draft, and then I assumed Vietnam had something to do with it. They were building up troops to go to Vietnam, and I received my draft notice. I didn't want to go into the military as an infantryman. That didn't quite seem like something I was going to want to do. And because of the fact that I had designs on being in law enforcement, I talked to a recruiter in Spokane, Washington, found out about the ability to enlist to be a military policeman. So that's what I did. I enlisted, and in January 1966, I went into the Army with the promises of being a military policeman. I went to basic training in Fort Ord, California. I quickly realized at that point in time that I'd made the right decision, because basic training is basic infantry training, and I knew then that I definitely did not want to be an infantryman. I then went from there to military police school in Fort Gordon, Georgia. Upon completion of military police school, I went to an Air Force base in Incirlik Air Force Base in Adana, Turkey, and I got my first curve by the military. I thought I was going to be working law enforcement, and they had me there guarding as a security guard, basically, for munitions in Turkey. Right. After being there for 3 months, I left. I went to France, but I was only in France for a very brief period of time, and was then sent to Germany, because at that time Charles de Gaulle was kicking everyone out of France. When I got to Germany, I found out that, again, I was going to be working as a security guard, and that didn't set with the designs of what I had in store for myself. So I found out that if I enlisted, I could be transferred to, re-enlisted, I should say, I could be transferred to a law enforcement military police unit, which I did. While working this military police unit, I become familiar with CID agents and thought that that's something that I would like to pursue. So I put in an application, and ultimately I was accepted. And in 1969, I went back to Fort Gordon, Georgia, attended the CID school, was then transferred to the Presidio of San Francisco, where I began working as a CID agent. At that point
sorry,
in
what,
time,
Gary?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Gary. What is a CID agent?
I'm sorry. CID is a criminal investigator for the Department of the Army. It's basically, I guess the best way that I could describe it is FBI for the Army.
Right.
The people that work and wear civilian clothes, and they are criminal investigators for the Army and handle murders, burglaries, robberies, drug cases, etc.
Right.
While I was in San Francisco, I got my first introduction to Vietnam. And what that was, the very first thing that happened while I was there was there were some allegations of atrocities at My Lai in Vietnam, where Lieutenant Calley and his troops had gone into a village and virtually massacred a couple of hundred Vietnamese, including women and children. And as a result of that, the CID agents in Vietnam were sending out requests for follow-up investigations in regards to the My Lai incident. And then, of course, once that one started, there was the, ball rolling down the hill and picking up speed, because there was now other atrocities that were coming out from other troops in regards to other locations. So because of these follow-up investigations, that was basically my first introduction to Vietnam, because I started doing some of these follow-up investigations in regards to the atrocities. One of the other things that took place when I was in San Francisco was a family whose son was killed in Vietnam, and they were notified by the military that he was killed in Vietnam. And because of the atrocity investigations that were taking place, it was all over the news. Because of that, they had formed the opinion that their son had been murdered. So they initiated an investigation themselves through congressional and things like that resulted in an investigation of that, and I was sent out to interview them, at which time I asked them for the evidence, or if they had any evidence that their son was murdered, and they showed me some letters that had come from their son, and in the letters he indicated that there was a man that he worked with, a sergeant that he worked with that was crazy, and the guy run around with a gun all the time, etc. And this didn't make a lot of sense to me because this was a combat zone, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people running around with guns. So I queried Vietnam, CID, and ultimately I had news for the family that they didn't want to hear, and that was the fact that he had committed suicide. And the Army had basically not told them that he'd committed suicide, that in fact that he had just died while he was in Vietnam, which was one of the things that I found out much, much later was this was a common practice on the part of the Army to not be totally and completely forthcoming with family members when there was a death. And I'm not sure if the military was protecting themselves or protecting the family.
And that included all kinds of deaths, overdoses, suicides, just misadventure.
That's correct. That's correct. Ultimately, now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to just, the My Lai massacre, we've dealt with it in terms of described the incident, and Sergeant Callie, I believe his name is, but you explain in the book how this could possibly, and not be defended, but how this could possibly happen, that women and children would be considered. You explain in your book, and I won't take the words out of your mouth, so tell us how you explain how this may have happened, whether it, not to say it's right, a massacre is a massacre, innocent people killed is exactly that, but tell us how it could happen by the, we'll say, the behavior of the Vietnamese.
Well, one of the things that back then, females in our armies were not combat soldiers. Females in our armies held administrative jobs for nurses, worked in supply, that kind of thing is in our army. Over in Vietnam, after I got there, I found this out very, very quickly, that it was not uncommon to see females in uniform, to see females carrying AK-47. It was not uncommon to see a teenage boy, a young teenage boy, carrying an AK-47. This was not uncommon to see. Now, I'm not talking about combat troops that I come in contact with, because I didn't come in contact with in a combat situation with these people. This is just people that you would see in the villages. As an example of that, I will give an example that's in the book. One day while I was in Chu Lai, I exited the base, and as I'm driving down QL1, which was the main road through Vietnam, I see a crowd of people, and I see a truck sitting there, and as I approach, I pull to the side of the road, because the road's kind of blocked anyway, and I'm curious as to what's going on. It looks like there's some type of activity taking place. And when I get out of the vehicle, I walk over, and there's a woman standing there in uniform. She's wearing combat fatigues, and she is making a speech in Vietnamese to these people that are there. And I immediately recognize this female. She happens to be a cocktail waitress at one of the clubs on the base at Chu Lai. Now, while she's giving this speech, I notice that basically a little bit at her feet and a little bit off to the side is two bodies laying there. And these two bodies are decapitated. They have their hands cut off. They have their feet cut off. And on the other side of her are two wooden ammo boxes. And in the ammo boxes, laying down on the flat surface would be the palms of the hands, palms down, of these two individuals. At the base of the box were the feet of the two individuals, just propped up against the bottom. And then at the top of the box was the heads of these two individuals. So it looked like about a 18-inch tall man sitting there.
Wow.
And this is not, and she was standing there with a machete, and she had blood all over her. And this is not the type of thing that we here in the United States would envision one of our females back then, as a combat soldier. And now I agree, we don't go around decapitating, cutting hands off, etc. But this is just to show you that the females in Vietnam, it was not uncommon for them to be involved in some military thing. And in her case, she worked on the Chu Lai base by day and was in some sort of militia by night.
Wow. You talk about another example where a 6-year-old boy was, the facts were that he had thrown a grenade into a tank, killing soldiers. Yes,
that's true. A small child, he has no idea, I'm sure, what he's doing.
Sure.
But, he's like 6 years old, 5 years old, something like that, and he takes and lobs a hand grenade, or lobs, I shouldn't say it that way. He walks up to a Jeep and drops the hand grenade into the gas tank of the Jeep, detonating it. This was the kind of thing that people had to watch out for all the time, because this kind of stuff took place on a regular basis.
Right. Now, you talk about this prevailing attitude. I'm trying to get the vivid portrayal that you do in your book in this brief interview that we have. But we have a bunch of divergent elements going on here and issues. Vietnam War was not without its controversy right from the very beginning, but especially as the war wore on, let's say, and an attitude towards the war changed, and not for the better. So tell us what the prevailing attitude was in 1971, we'll say from U.S. citizens, but what was the attitude with soldiers there, and describe when you got to Chu Lai in Vietnam, what was the overall condition of the soldiers? What did you witness that you, even though you, I don't know what you expected, but you probably found this surprising. So tell us what you did observe as soon as you got there, and the morale, and what was the attitude? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I first got to Vietnam, I had been in the military 5 years. And anybody that's ever been in the military, or people that have read about it, etc., there is a certain amount of discipline and protocol and procedures and things that the military follows on a regular basis. And then by the same token, when I went to Chu Lai, or when I went to Vietnam, my perception was that I was going to be going to a combat zone. And when I got to Chu Lai, the first thing that I realized at that point in time was that the place that I was at was a metropolitan area. It had like a 26-mile perimeter around it. There were businesses there, PXs and all this stuff, a theater. There were clubs, I should say, not nightclubs, but clubs. It was just like being in a city, except for the fact that all the buildings were made out of plywood with corrugated steel roofing, etc. The second thing that I noticed right away when I got there was the fact that there didn't appear to be a whole lot of discipline as far as the protocol was concerned in regards to, for example, uniforms. I had never, in my 5 years prior, seen someone with a peace symbol pinned to their uniform. Back in the 70s was the flower children era, the question authority type thing that was taking place, and one of the things that they had were what they called love beads. And these, I'll use the term hippie. I don't know if that's the appropriate term for the moment, but these civilians back here, they wore beads around their necks and with different peace emblems on them and things like that. Well, I get to Chu Lai, and one of the first things that I notice about the troops is the peace medals and the beads that they're wearing around their neck, bead bracelets that they're wearing. If you took, if they took the uniform off of them and planted them in the United States, they'd fit right in. That really shocked me when I saw that, because I had never seen the military uniform disrespected the way that it was by the troops that were there. Now, I'm not saying all the troops did that. The officers obviously didn't. I never saw officers with peace medals pinned to their chest or wearing beads. It was the enlisted men, the lower-ranking enlisted men that were doing this, and it was obvious that the military had lost control. The second thing that I noticed along those same lines was the fact that the black troops had kind of put themselves in a attitude of they're enslaved in a white man's war. Well, as a result of this, they wore what they called slave bracelets. And these slave bracelets, or slave jewelry, was braided out of black bootlaces. So they had bracelets braided on that they wore on their wrists. They had choker chains that they wore around their neck. Some of them had bands that were braided and above their bicep. They would have a braided configuration that would be 6 to 8 inches long that would go between the wrist and the elbow. And they wore all this stuff with their uniforms. Now, back in the United States, the attitude back there was this was not a war that was not a popular war. There was a lot of protests taking place here in the United States that were anti-war. There were people, at that time there was a draft that I previously mentioned. There were people that were running off to Canada to avoid the draft and coming up with various excuses as to why they shouldn't be drafted. And at the same time, it just, you were taking these same people that had that attitude in the homeland, drafting them, and then taking them over and dropping them in the middle of a war zone. So they were bringing their ideas with them that they had before they ever left the United States.
Now, you talk about drug use there being rampant, and especially marijuana, but, heroin being a more serious drug and a more serious issue, I would imagine, and access being very, very easy there. Tell us about drug use, and were you surprised at the extent of it, and what was your conclusion in terms of did they develop this habit once they were in Vietnam, or did they bring it along with them from the United States?
Well, there were three drugs basically that you saw in Vietnam. One of them was marijuana, and it was everywhere. The second thing was heroin, and it run a real close second. In some cases, I would say that it was probably a good first. The third thing that we had over there was opium. You didn't see a lot of it, but there was opium over there, and opium was coming in a little button, and it was about the size of a shirt button. And they'd break off a little piece of it and stick it in a little pipe and smoke it and get the euphoric effects of the opium. As far as the marijuana was concerned, marijuana got so bad over there that the military basically gave up on it. And the reason that they gave up on it was because heroin was just as bad, and they directed their attention at heroin. Now, the marijuana that they had over there, an individual could purchase marijuana and roll his own or put it in a pipe. One of the very common ways, though, to get marijuana was a commercially packaged marijuana cigarette. These cigarettes looked like a Cool or a Lucky Strike non-filter, They packaged them up, 10 in a pack, and it was a little plastic bag that was just had been sealed by melting the plastic, hermetically sealed, I guess. And they sealed them in that, and they sold them for $2 a pack. And with those, unless somebody was downwind and could smell them, then it would look like from a distance that someone was just smoking a regular cigarette. It didn't have any appearance whatsoever of a hand-rolled cigarette. The heroin itself was just unbelievable over there. It was, by the time I got to Vietnam, heroin had really taken over. Heroin was sold in little clear plastic vials. They had a little snap cap on them that closed them. And they held a quarter of a gram. They sold for $2 per vial. And they had 94 to 98% pure heroin in them. This heroin was being smoked by the GIs over there, and the reason that it was being smoked was because they believed that in order to get addicted, you had to be a needle freak. You had to be injecting. They did not realize that by smoking heroin, that they would become addicted to it. The way that they smoked it was they would take cool cigarettes, pull the tobacco out, put in a little bit of tobacco back in, pour a little bit of heroin in it, a little more tobacco, a little heroin, a little tobacco, and they would layer it throughout the cigarette. And they would just take a tool and just pack the tobacco down, and then add the heroin and pack a little bit more. And then, if somebody was standing there smoking a cool cigarette, it looked like he was smoking a cool cigarette, when in fact he was smoking heroin, and he was getting the euphoric effect of it and getting very addicted to it. It was very, very, heroin was just unbelievable over there. It was everywhere. When you walked through the company areas on Chu Lai, you would find vials, empty vials, discarded everywhere. There was one captain, I was at his office one day, and he had just flat given up fighting the system and what he had done, or fighting the heroin system that was taking place in his company. And what he did was he started collecting heroin vials. And he took these heroin vials and he placed them side by side on every flat surface of his office. And his office was covered with thousands of these vials. He even put them on bookshelves and weaved them in out of the book bindings as they went across the shelf. And he'd just give it up. He just had decided that he was, he wasn't going to drive him crazy anymore. So he made a hobby out of it. When I first went to Vietnam, well, let me rephrase that. The year before I went to Vietnam, the arrest ratio for heroin was 6 for every 1,000 GIs. That was 1970. In 1971, when I was there, it was 12 arrests for every 1,000 GIs that was there. And this is only the ones that got caught. This has got nothing to do with the ones that, were using it at getting away with it.
Now, give us, as you do in the book, you give us some examples of what this really, what this drug use, this rampant drug use, and the surrounding drug crime that goes along with that, the trafficking of this, and serious money and serious drugs creates an atmosphere that other things can happen as well. So, give us a couple stories of what the ramifications of having this valuable drug that everyone was addicted to, and the business that went along with it. Tell us a couple tales about that.
Sure. I'll do this one first. There was a guy that I worked with. Well, I'll back up one step. We developed an informant in Vietnam that was helping us there at Chu Lai, And the reason he was helping us so much is because the guy was under the influence of heroin all the time. He he kept getting arrested and kept getting arrested, and he kept helping us, and it would help his case go away, as happens a lot in the working narcotics, where, mere possession, you can kind of make it go away if he's going to do something for a bigger case and things like this. Well, one of the cases that he did was for a guy that I worked with, and we went, what the deal was is he was going to go to this place off base, and he was going to make a heroin purchase, just get a couple of vials of heroin. And then after he made the purchase, he would come outside the hooch, and he would give a signal. And then we would go into the hooch and make the arrest. And everything went according to plan. And once we got inside the hooch, there was a 17-year-old girl in there, and she had 17 pounds of heroin. The largest quantity of heroin I saw in one hunk while I was over there. And it was in an ammo box. And she had virtually thousands of vials, empty vials, that she was filling. Well, based upon doing simple math, she had enough heroin to fill about 32,000 vials, and at $2 a vial, that would be $62,000.
Right.
Especially in the Vietnam economy back then, that you just well been talking millions. Most of our heroin dealers that we had over there were Vietnamese. Most of them were female. There were a few male dealers, but most of the time they were female. And one of the reasons that the females worked out for them was the females had places to hide heroin when they came on base that males don't have. And so they would smuggle the heroin onto the base and sell it that way. Well, but in this particular case, with this 17 pounds of heroin and this teenage girl, that was off base. Another one that took place off base, this was my case, same informant. He said that he knew of some females that were selling heroin at the rock quarry off the base, and that he would make a purchase for us. So I decided that I kind of had delusions of grandeur, and rather than get a couple vials of heroin, I thought I'd get quite a few, purchase quite a few, hoping that it would lead to bigger and better things. And so what we did was he was going to drive out there, and we had a 3/4-ton Jeep with a canvas top on it. I painted a peace symbol on top of the canvas so that we could recognize it from the air. There were some CID agents that were following him, and some other CID agents, myself included, that boarded a Huey helicopter. And we went up in the air, and we were able to very easily track him because of this peace symbol that I had painted on the roof. He proceeded to the rock quarry, and we could see from the helicopter, we were quite a ways up, but we could see from the helicopter that he met up with some females. He got out, got back in his vehicle, then got out and opened the hood as if there was something wrong with the vehicle, which was our signal to come into the rock quarry. So what the pilot did was he auto-rotated into the rock quarry, which is kind of a controlled crash landing, I guess, for lack of a better term. I'm not a helicopter pilot, but that's kind of like what it is. And as we're coming down, I'm standing outside the door, standing on the skid of the helicopter. And one of the things that we never factored into this thing that we were at a rock quarry. And as soon as the helicopter got close to the ground, the dust just started boiling. You couldn't see anything. And then I saw what I thought was the ground, and it looked pretty close. Well, rather than waiting until the helicopter touched down, I stepped off the skid, and it was a long way to the ground. Fortunately for me, I didn't get hurt. I hit pretty hard. I rolled pretty good. Then the helicopter landed, and everybody else got out, and everybody's kind of laughing at me because I'd been such a fool rather than waiting. I had gotten over anxious and jumped out. As we had discussed, the helicopter then immediately took off. Well, here we go again. We forgot about the dust, and we couldn't see anything. And the helicopter lifted off. We had to wait for the dust to clear. We were able to capture the 3 females that he had dealt with. We were able to recover the heroin from him that he had purchased. But we never did find my money. Never did find it. So obviously it got stashed someplace, or there was another person there that took off with it during the dust storm, or what. We took the females back. We had them searched and all that, but to no avail. And then, the way most of those cases went, in fact, all of the cases involving Vietnamese nationals, we give the heroin and the arrestees to the local police, which, you can't substantiate it, but I know darn well what happened. That heroin went right back into the market. Nothing was ever done with the females, and the heroin was, I'm sure later on we bought it or some other GI bought it.
Right. Yeah, not so tough on crime there, right?
No, they weren't. It was pretty corrupt.
Now, you talk about the prevailing attitude of these guys high on heroin, and there was no real morale was low for the war. People were drafted, basically. Not too many people volunteered, and the guy on the front lines certainly didn't. Now, you talk about a couple incidents, and it's quite shocking the compensation that Vietnamese families would get for, say, their son or their daughter killed in certain accidents or incidents. 2 stories in particular, the one about the girl that was found raped and killed in the street, and that resultant story. And then after that, you can tell us about the boy in the garbage dump and the target practice that went horribly wrong. But first, tell us about the girl that was found in the street and that investigation and what it all amounted to.
Okay, there was a young lady. She had. Are you referring to the one that was in the Foot Locker or a different one? To be specific,
the Foot Locker. Yeah.
The Foot Locker. Okay, there was a girl that was murdered. Well, that particular one, the girl in the Foot Locker, she was murdered and raped. Raped and murdered, I should reverse that. She had been raped and murdered. She'd been placed in the Foot Locker and then driven off base, thrown out of the whatever vehicle hauled her out there, presumably a military vehicle, presumably a GI driver, and also presumably a prostitute. That's not known for sure, but presumably so. In that particular case, she was never identified, and we never did find the perpetrator in regards to that one. But another one where there was a young girl that got run over by a convoy. Now, the thing that you were talking about, the compensation, they called it solidium payments.
Right.
And what they did is if there was death or injury or damage to property, this kind of thing, the government paid out money to the Vietnamese, but the amount of money that they paid out was pathetic. As an example, a young girl, she was run over by a convoy. Her parents got $467 for her death caused by a military convoy. Now, that particular amount of money, $467, was a lot of money in comparison to what the other payments were. Normally, for death or injury, it was anywhere between $27, $47 for death or injury. There was a young boy he was killed by intentional gunfire, but it's possible, let's rephrase that. It's possible that the gunfire was to scare him, and then as a result of scaring him, he was accidentally shot. That is a possibility, or in fact, he could have been intentionally shot. His parents got a grand total of $10 for his death, inflicted by a GI shooting a gun. Over a 6-month period, the government, the Army, I should say, paid out a little over $17,000 to 122 claimants. That's not a lot of money to a lot of people, quite a few people, and that's not a lot of money. This type of thing took place all the time. I'll give you an example. There was a Arvin that he was Vietnamese Army, ex-Vietnamese Army, I should say, because he was missing both of his legs. He was wheelchair bound. He used to come up to the front gate at Chu Lai on his wheelchair, and then he'd reach under his stub, pull out a hand grenade, pull the pin, and he would sit there. And then pretty soon G5 would come out. G5 is the one that made the payments. They would come out, count him out some money. He'd put the pin back in the grenade, put it back under his stub, take the money, put it in his pocket, and he'd wheel himself away. This was nothing but an extortion thing that he did, and he did this about once a month. Another such payment that was made at this same gate, as a matter of fact, was there was an MP out there working the gate, and a kid threw a rock at him, hit him in the face, broke his jaw. The MP grabbed the kid, slapped him, released him. The parents come back. They then made a payment to the parents for the MP slapping their kid. And then this extortion thing got to be worse, to the point of what they were doing was convoys would be coming down QL1, and they would take a piece of concertina wire and pull it across the road and basically set up a gate with this piece of concertina wire. The convoy would stop. They'd sit there until G5 come out and counted them out some money. Then they'd push their concertina wire off the road, wait for the next convoy. One particular day when this happened, the driver didn't want to slow down or didn't want to stop. He was slowing down, but he didn't want to stop. So one of the Vietnamese threw a rock, hit the driver in the head, knocked him unconscious, and the vehicle came to a stop. The concertina wire stretched across the road, and they're demanding their money. Well, the passenger didn't want to go along with the program. So what he did was got himself in the driver's seat, put it in gear, drove through the concertina wire. When he did that, the concertina wire entangled three Vietnamese kids. He is barreling towards the gate with this concertina wire wrapped around the truck, and these kids entangled in the concertina wire, bouncing along behind. And now this Arvin that's out there ramrodding this thing, the one with the missing legs, he's got an M16 rifle, and he starts shooting at the truck on full auto. Well, when he does this M16 climbs up a little bit, and he's kind of leaning back in his chair, and the end result is he falls flat on his back, and he's now shooting in the air. The truck gets to the gate, gets in the gate, and now G5 comes out, and they pay the parents of these three kids. Fortunately, they weren't killed or anything, but they had some bruises and scratches and stuff like this from being dragged along. G5 came out, paid them, and then went out and paid the extortionists that are being led by this Arvin.
Wow. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why you wrote this book and why you felt it important to talk about a few really important issues, especially important to you. And that being that you make a point that and we did in the introduction, that a small amount of people actually were in Vietnam, but all kinds of people at least talk about being in Vietnam and consider themselves Vietnam vets. And also you have a big issue with, again, we know that it's limited amount of resources for deserving veterans, and you talk about the undeserving veteran and the unethical psychiatrist or psychologist that would award somebody that really didn't even see any combat. Tell us about these issues and why they're important to you, and tell us a little bit about some of the things you just discussed in the book about this issue. Sure,
be more than happy to. An American in this day and age, now we're 40 years past Vietnam, a little bit over, everybody, when they think about a Vietnam veteran, they envision a man with a steel pot, grenades hanging from a flak vest, he's got a Bowie knife at his waist, he's got a M79 grenade launcher in one hand, M60 machine gun in the other. Basically like you see in the Rambo movies. That's what they envision all Vietnam veterans as. The truth of the matter is, there are, 9.2 million people that are classified as Vietnam veterans. Now, of these 9.2 million, there are actually only 2.8 million of them that walked on, bobbed in a boat off the shores of, or flew over Vietnam. The rest of the 9.2 million were in the military, doing their job other places, back in the States, in Germany, and the Philippines, Japan, Korea, all the other places that the military does their thing. Now, they're classified as Vietnam veterans, Vietnam-era veterans, because of the fact that they were in the military during the Vietnam era. I don't have any issue with that. The issue that I have with it is the fact that, it's, like I say, it's been over 40 years since Vietnam. I have yet to talk to one person that claims or is a Vietnam veteran that doesn't regale stories of their combat missions and sloshing through rice paddies and holding their best friend while he bleeds out and dies in his arms and stuff like this. And the truth of the matter is, of the 2.8 million people that were in Vietnam, that only happened to less than 20% of the people. Less than 20% of the people actually saw combat in Vietnam. The other 80+% were support troops, just like I was. Right. The military can't run without support troops. I'm not denigrating anybody that is a support troop. The men in the field, they depend upon these support troops for transportation, food, clothing, weapons, ammunition, medical care, administrative duties, all the creature comforts that people require. This comes about, though, as a result of the media is real big in making this appear the way that it does. When the media goes into a combat zone, they don't interview the guy in the motor pool that's fixing the Jeeps or changing the oil. They don't interview the guy that's back at the base camp that's or the installation that they're at that's cooking breakfast, dinner, and supper. Now, don't get me wrong; these people are important, but the media doesn't care about them. They're looking for the hero slant on their story. So that's who they interview. They go out and they interview the 20-year-old young kid that hasn't seen a shower in 30 days, has been eating nothing but rations. He's filthy, dirty. He needs a shave. And that's who they interview. And that's what they perceive that all troops are like. And that's not the case at all. These guys are the support troops. They're important, and I can't emphasize that enough. I have nothing against them. I have nothing against any of these veterans. It's just that a lot of, 40 years later, a lot of people take credit for being Vietnam veterans when in fact they're not. There was a census, and I can't remember for sure which one it was. I believe that it was in 2000. I may be in error there. But when it come time to check the little box, 13.8 million people claimed to have been in-country veterans in Vietnam. And it's not even close to that. You know, they're all wannabes. They're making it up. See, the Vietnam War was, back then, the Vietnam War was an undesirable thing, and people didn't want to admit to being in the military. Now that, because of Afghanistan and Iran, there's a lot of hero worship that the country is doing, and justifiably so, don't get me wrong there. But these people, because they want to be identified as with these heroes, they're pretending to be somebody that they're not.
Even
one of the things,
even more. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say is that what's even more, which is more egregious, is that this post-traumatic stress disorder is a very serious thing. But if you didn't actually weren't in actual combat and weren't in a firefight, and it is unlikely that you would be as deserving as someone that was on that front line that did see his friend's head blown off or something of that sort, rather than somebody that just is malingering, claiming to have some sort of disorder. It does a discredit to all the real, genuine veterans that did suffer in a war with traumatic events.
Certainly. There's young men and women in any war that lose limbs, lose their eyesight, lose their hearing. They have very traumatic brain injuries. All these people, those people are true heroes, and they deserve to have this country take care of them and honor them.
That's right.
When you have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, there are people that deserve to have PTSD. Somebody that's been in a combat zone and held his friend that died. Somebody that spent the night out in the middle of somewhere not knowing if he was going to see the sunrise. Those people deserve to have, I shouldn't say deserve to have, but are entitled to be suffering from PTSD because of what they went through. Whereas the Veterans Administration is handing out PTSD to people that never left the country, this country. If someone that was in the military can present a plausible story to the VA about the fact that they went into the military and they were stationed in Texas throughout their entire career, and the entire time that they were there, they traumatized over the fact that they might get sent to a combat zone. That could qualify them for the benefits that someone else is getting for lost limbs or traumatic brain disorders, things like this. That qualifies them for it. This PTSD, these people ought to be ashamed of themselves. There's a lot of money that needs to be spent for the people that do, in fact, have serious injuries. And when somebody is pretending to have PTSD, faking it, for lack of a better term, they are taking away from these veterans that really and truly need all the help that they can get. You have organizations like Wounded Warriors that do whatever they can, and this is honorable. But it's not the job of the citizens of this country to support a charity to do this. Our government, our VA, should be doing this automatically, and it makes it real difficult for them financially when you have all these fakers. There was a article that I read here not too long ago, and this was not Vietnam, but in reference to the Iraq and Afghan returnees, where I want to say it's in Seattle. I can't remember for sure, but I want to say Seattle, a VA hospital up there, where two psychiatrists said that 60% of the people that are being awarded PTSD are fakers. But unfortunately, you can't prove that they're faking. It's like somebody claiming to have an injury that in their back that doesn't show up on an X-ray. Doesn't mean they don't have a back injury. It's just you can't prove it. And it's the same thing with the PTSD. They are, there's no way, if someone has a good story, there's no way to prove that they're not having these dreams. Because nobody's in their head when they're having these dreams about how traumatic it is to worry about going to war. And that really, really bothers me. Another thing that's kind of an issue with me is the Vietnam Memorial Wall.
Right.
There's 58,000 names on that wall. The truth of the matter is, everybody believes, and I believed this at one point in time too, that everybody that was that's on that wall died in combat, and that is not true. Virtually 1/6 of the names that are on that wall are not combat related, and I'll give you some examples of that. People that die from drug overdoses. Any person that died of a drug overdose in Vietnam is on that wall. Any person that committed suicide in Vietnam is on that wall. People that got involved in a barroom brawl and got killed as a result of it, a brawl that they may have started, they're on the wall. People that get killed fighting over a whore on base or off base in Vietnam, they're on the wall. One of the examples that I can give in regards to this is when I was in Germany, before I went to Vietnam, there was a young troop that got drunk, knee-walking drunk, and when he got put to bed by his buddies because he couldn't get there himself, during the night he aspirated, and he drowned in his own puke. Fast forward to when I was in Vietnam. A troop there ingested heroin, overdosed, vomited, aspirated, and drowned in his own puke in Vietnam. Now, if the young troop that in Germany would have survived, he would have been a Vietnam-era vet because he was in during the Vietnam conflict or war. The one in Vietnam that aspirated and drowned by his own design, he's the one that ingested the heroin, he's on the wall. And being honored as a hero every time that wall, either the real one or the traveling one, go throughout the United States, that man is being honored as a hero because he has a place on that wall. And there are a lot of names that I personally know from my 11 months in Vietnam, in particular my 8 months in Chu Lai, that are on that wall that did not die honorably. They died because of their own doing. One example that I can give in regards to that is two guys, two GIs, both of them sergeants, were at a club one night, and one of them started taunting the other one, and it was a racially motivated taunt. The taunting escalated. At the end of the night, the taunter wound up getting stabbed to death in the parking lot by the tauntee. That man, you know, if you did start a fight here in the United States that now in this day and age in particular that was racially motivated, they certainly wouldn't erect a monument in your honor. But that man is on the same wall that travels all over the United States. Now, the perpetrator of that, he was tried, convicted, and he served 13 months in prison, and then he was discharged.
Right.
But, you know, there are, like I say, 1/6 of it. Now, I'm not saying that every one of the 1/6 on that wall died of a heroin overdose, you know, or that kind of thing, but 1/6 of them are non-combat related. And I don't think people realize that. The remaining 5, 6 on there, they are all true heroes. They died doing what this country asked them to do, and they deserve a place of honor like that wall.
Now you have these criticisms of your adventure in Vietnam, but at the same time, you said it was the best year of your life. Is there any conflict with that you had a great time, but?
Well, the reason that I say it was one of the best years of my life was because I was not a combat troop. And I'll also have to qualify that a little bit by saying I may have a different thought if I was over there in 1967 or 68, but I wasn't. I was there 71, 72. And I went over there not as a combat troop. I went over there as a support troop. And my job was to fight a war within a war, for lack of a better term, I guess. My enemy over there was not the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong. My enemy over there was the troops that I was over there with. It was my job to investigate crimes by these troops, and there was a lot of it. And I had a lot of fun doing it. I won't deny it. I spent all of my adult life working in law enforcement, 27 years with LAPD. And one of the greatest things to me, let me put it that way, to me, one of the greatest things is the ability to hunt man. And I don't mean to go out and kill somebody. That's not what I'm talking about. But somebody do something and then, or is about to do something, and be able to outthink them enough to either prevent it or catch them. That's what I mean by hunting man.
Right.
And I did that in Vietnam, and it was just, there was more crime over there than you could shake a stick at. I liked working drugs. There was drugs over there everywhere, and I got the opportunity to work narcotics over there. And then another thing that I liked was the fact that I was in Vietnam and I wore civilian clothes. I did not wear a uniform when I was in Vietnam. CID agents in Vietnam did not wear uniforms. We didn't have any of the military protocol that we had to deal with, or that everybody else has to deal with, although when I was over there, this military was pretty much, the kind of in a demise. It was falling apart. But because of the fact I wore civilian clothes, I could come and go as I pleased pretty much. Nobody, questioned anything that I did anywhere that I went. It was the same way here in the States. Don't get me wrong. As a CID here in the States, I wore civilian clothes on military bases also. But in Vietnam, it was much, much different. As a result of that, I was able to, with some other guys, we were able to acquire a hooch that we lived in that was away from the rest of the troops. We were all by ourselves. We had our own little building, our own showers, our own, bathroom facilities. That's pretty using that term pretty loosely because they're nothing but outhouses. But and then we had, like a living room in there. We had our own beds in there. And then, of course, there was the female companionship. There was a lot of that in Vietnam, and it fell under a few different categories. One of the categories being you could establish a relationship with a female companion that didn't have any strings attached. You hung out with them or they hung out with you, and nothing was expected of anybody. And the next thing that they had over there, a lot of, was what we called 50p whores. And what 50p was 33 cents. And for 33 cents, a GI could have his way with her for 33 cents. And then the other type of whore, although they didn't consider themselves whores, they considered themselves girlfriends, was coming in contact with somebody that, you buy them something from the PX, like a refrigerator or, cigarettes or whatever. Those were gifts. She wasn't whoring, she was gifting. And then there was the other one that was a girlfriend that was looking for a ticket back to the United States. They're looking to get married. Now, the military itself also had they never called it a brothel. They didn't call it a house of prostitution. They didn't call it a whorehouse. But what they had on the military installations was what they called a massage parlor. And for $2, any GI that was on that base could go there and get a massage. Well, once behind closed doors, it was nothing more than a organized, military-sanctioned house of ill repute. I personally was never at one. Never had the need to go there. That's part of where I think that I had a good time. Most of the girls that I dealt with were cocktail waitresses at the clubs. They worked on the base. I had a couple of encounters with these 50p whores, but that never on base. And the girls, the cocktail waitresses, most of them were looking for the ticket. Promise them anything, don't give them anything. And that was pretty much my attitude while I was over there. One of the things that, back to the 50p whore thing, that's one of the things that the GIs used to do, is smuggle them on base, because they couldn't be there. They didn't work there. They didn't have credentials to be on the base or anything, but some GI would be in a convoy or something and pick up a whore and bring it on base and smuggle them into their camp. And then these, at 33 cents a pop, get passed around the area, and they called them security violations. And if they got caught, they immediately got evicted off of the base. But most of the time there wasn't any catching there, because there wasn't anybody in the company areas that was going to snitch them off. But when I say it was one of the best years of my life, was because I was able to do, work-wise, exactly what I wanted to do, and it was fun. I wouldn't have been a policeman all the years that I was if it wasn't fun. And I had a great time doing it. So that part of it is part of it, and then the ability to do what I wanted. And then, of course, like I say, the female companionship. I never had an issue of wanting and not being able to achieve.
Now, you talk about in the book about the prevailing attitude that enabled, again, some of the stories that if we put them all together, the woman was raped and murdered in a footlocker and dumped. Likely, it looked like military, but no arrests were made. Nothing was made out of that case. Certainly no real outrage. The boy was shot at the dump, like compensation $10 for somebody. You talked about, you categorize these women as the 33-cent whore, or 50p whore. What was the attitude that the U.S. citizens that were now military, what was the attitude that was used there to enable people to come into this country and be at war with these people that you talk about?
Well, there was always the perception that, and a lot of this goes back to what they were told by their fathers and their grandfathers in regards to Korea, that the Asian people, life means nothing to them. Okay, that's a perception that they bring with them, and that comes from Korea, because you hear stories, and I don't know if they're true or not, but you hear stories about how during the Korean War, The Chinese would come charging, and there'd be one gun for 6 men, and when the person carrying the gun got shot, the next one picked it up and continued on the fight, and when he got shot, the next one, etc. That developed the attitude that there was they didn't respect life, didn't care about life, and so they brought that with them. And then, of course, the military kind of hooked into that. And as a couple of examples, where somebody was killed, a Vietnamese was killed in regards to what the military did about it. There were a couple of captains that decided that they were going to fight the drug war themselves. So they went out to the perimeter because they believed that the drugs were coming from children through the fence to GIs. So they went out there with a M79 grenade launcher, except they weren't using grenades, they were using tear gas canisters. They went out there and they saw children close to the fence, and they started popping tear gas canisters at these kids. The kids would run off because of the tear gas. Then they'd come back and they'd pop at them some more, and the kids would run off. Well, one of the times that they popped at these kids, these 2 captains hit a Vietnamese girl in the head, and they killed her with one of these tear gas canisters. There was absolutely no disciplinary action whatsoever against these 2 captains that did that. None. But then by the same token, the military kind of adopted the same attitude in regards to their own troops. An example of that I've got in the book is there is a guy by the name of James, and these are all pseudonyms. I don't use any of the real names in the book, but a guy by the name of James shoots a sergeant by the name of Stillwell, and he shoots him in the stomach or chest area. Killed him. James is arrested for murder. Then he pleads guilty to unlawful killing, and I'm not really sure what that entails, but he was pled guilty to unlawful killing. He was then sentenced to 6 months confinement, forfeiture of $150 pay for 6 months, and reduced in rank. Everything was overturned except for the forfeiture of pay, which means that Sergeant Stillwell's life, as far as the military was concerned, was worth $900. And that was it. Now, the records indicate that Sergeant Stillwell was killed in action, non-hostile accident. So not only was it, the people bringing this attitude with them over here and not caring, the military was doing exactly the same thing. Like, for example, the barroom brawl that I told you mentioned earlier, 13 months for stabbing a guy twice. The guy didn't run into the knife twice, but he got 13 months over it. And there's just story after story similar to that, where nothing happened. Another guy was shooting grenades with an M79 grenade launcher at water buffalo. And he's shooting at these water buffalo. The MPs get called. He's out there by the perimeter, outside the perimeter, and he's shooting at these water buffalo. The MPs get called. They try to get the guy to quit. He won't quit. So to get him to surrender and scare him, they fire over his head with an M60 machine gun. That immediately gets him to surrender, but a Vietnamese child was killed as a result of it. I'm sorry, he wasn't killed. He was hit in the hip. Excuse me. He was hit in the hip. Nobody was held culpable for that. You would think that the guy with the M79 grenade launcher that started this thing, or somebody along the line, should have been held culpable for that, but nobody was. And that type of thing is, it was just the way it was. The Army had, or the military, I should say, was just disintegrating in bits and pieces. And it's fortunate that we were actually, in full retreat at that time. Because it wasn't very long after that, there wasn't anybody left in Vietnam.
Wow. Gary, this book is an incredible story about that, like you say, other Vietnam memoirs have focused on much different issues and probably subject matter to a certain degree, and certainly a different era of the war itself. You had help with this book, but why did you feel it important to write this book at this time? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the help that you did receive putting this basically together.
Sure. The way this thing started out is my brother, who spent 27 years in the Air Force, him and I would get together on a regular basis, and we'd sit and drink beer, and we'd sit and tell war stories, and I would relate these stories, some of which I've related to you today, and many, many more. And it started out with my brother with the idea that we should do it, put this down on paper, and for our kids, just basically a diary for our kids. Well, it just so happened that because he was in the Air Force at the time, he was wound up back east, close to the archives, and he decided that one day to go to the archives and kind of look at some of the stories I'd been telling him. And so he asked for the MP blotters there, and so that he could look through them. The MP blotters, a chronological list of events for each day. And he got them, and he looked through them. And when he started looking through the first ones, he found a folded piece of paper stuck in the binder. And it turns out it was a crime report that was signed by me. He says it had no significance, so it never did wind up in this book. But then he really did the archival research on this thing. And all the crimes, all the deaths, everything that's mentioned in this book is backed up by archival research, every bit of it. The only thing that's not backed up is my anecdotal stuff. And there's no way to back it up. It's my word or my story against somebody else's story. That's the anecdotal part of it. But everything else in the book that pertains to deaths and court-martials and arrests and autopsies and things like that are mentioned in the book are all documented, were documented through the archives. Then from that point on, it just kind of started formulating into a book, although we didn't intend it to. And then, several people read our diary, for lack of a better term, that turned into a manuscript. And they thought that we should pursue this. And eventually, a gentleman by the name of Clay Jenkinson with the Dakota Institute in North Dakota, the man that wrote the foreword in the book, persuaded us into publishing the book through him, and it was published and released just a few months ago.
Well, I want to congratulate you. That was an amazing turn of events, and someone had the good sense to publish this book, and it's a wonderful project, and it's nice that your brother could help you with this and inspire you to do this as well. It is a very important book, too, because of the issues that you touch on, but it's a wonderful, vivid portrayal of, an amazing slice of American history. So I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about Not All Heroes.
Well, thank you very much.
Is there a way for people to contact you, or do you do the Facebook thing? Do you have a website? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about contact information.
Two ways, easy. One of them is Gary Skogen, Skogen, on Facebook. And the second way is Gary Skogen, one word, at gmail.com.
There you go. Well, I want to thank you, Gary, for a great interview, and congratulations on the book again. Like I say, Not All Heroes, and you have yourself a good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. It was a pleasure.
Good. Thank you. Good night.